Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipsters Curtain Calls. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I bring you compilations of my podcasts from season 6, 7, and 8 in a package of episodes that I call Crypto Hipsters Curtain Calls. And this is episode 48, entitled Another Brick in the Wall: Why Blockchains Must Be Implemented Brick by Brick globally for everyone's benefit. This particular episode has 4 clips from 4 different podcasts from one from season 6, one from season 7, and 2 from season 8. My first conversation was a delightful discussion back in December 2023 with Jathin Jagannath, who is developer advocate at Cartesi, and Awoskia Israel Ayodeji, who's the founder of Web3 Bridge. We talked about creating a richer and more robust blockchain developer space in Nigeria with a 4-week masterclass. This particular clip was from my conversation with Jathin. The whole entire podcast is a conversation with both men. And check that out. All my podcasts, by the way, are available on Spotify, on Apple, on Anchor, on YouTube, anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. The next podcast was from season 7. I spoke with Yair Cleper, who was the CEO and co-founder of Magma Devs, and also an initial core contributor at the Lava Network. We talked in June 2024, mid-June, June 17, how simplifying blockchain access help users build whatever, wherever. You call it whatever, wherever. Like I said, globally, blockchain implementation is a global phenomenon. We'd go down deep into that conversation. My third podcast was from season 8, was in August 2024. It was the second episode of season 8. I spoke with Adrien Stern, who is the founder and CEO at Reveel. We talked about why everyone should have access to on-chain payments across multiple blockchains. And then last but not least, from season 8 was in January 2025. One of my first videos, one of them, and that was with Ali Madhavji, who is a managing partner at the Blockchain Founders Fund. And we talked about how helping early stage founders and leverage blockchain technology to bring forth their ventures into the world. That was an amazing discussion as well. And that was in January 2025. So all these together, all these 4 compilations together, make up episode 48. We're going to 67 total. And I hope to have that done for you by end of March with all of them published. We started in October. This has been a journey. I still have season 9 to put together. And coming up soon will be season 10. I haven't launched that yet, but we'll do so. Planning on April 2026. So, again, this conversation, this title, episode 48, is Another Brick in the Wall: Why Blockchains Must Be Implemented Brick by Brick globally for everyone's benefit. Thank you for tuning in. I will see you next time, and enjoy this compilation. Thank you.
As institutional adoption continues slowly right now, why must we continue to build solutions that enable sovereignty, self-sovereignty, while ensuring security for everybody?
That's the most relevant question considering the current crypto landscape. And I hope you don't mind if I go a bit lengthy or in detail regarding this. So first of all, I'll start with the terms sovereignty and security and how Cartesi addresses that in detail. So Cartesi has a modular architecture. Like as I mentioned, what we have effectively done is we have separated the execution layer from the consensus layer, the data availability layer, and the settlement layer. These are the 4 layers which actually constitute a rollup in general. Like you need to have these 4 layers. So in general, Ethereum in the mainnet, everything is handled by the Ethereum network. But the concept of rollups is to actually separate the execution layer off chain into different technologies and still maintain security and data availability using the underlying blockchain. So Cartesi is modular in the sense that not only is it deployable on Ethereum mainnet, but it is also deployable on any EVM compatible chain. For example, it can be deployed on Arbitrum, it can be deployed on Optimism, it can be deployed on Scroll, you name it. Anything that is EVM compatible, you can deploy the Cartesi rollups framework and have the Cartesi machine interact with that. So we provide this modularity, and sovereignty is something where you have complete control of your assets and where you can have the confidence that all my assets are actually in my possession. So Cartesi ensures this through the underlying blockchain, not only the settlement layer, but also the consensus layer is through the EVM blockchain, where the security is not limited to a particular chain. For example, you feel that one chain is compromised. You say that Arbitrum or Optimism is compromised. So you're not limited. You can just take your DApp and shift your architecture to another layer 2. So the security completely depends upon the technology that you trust. So it doesn't have to be fixed in nature. You can deploy it to different chains. So it's both modular and also secure in a sense. So it can be also deployed as sovereign rollups, but let's not get into that. But yeah, we can deploy it as an L2 and also as an L3, not just on Ethereum mainnet, but also on any layer 2 scaling solution that you can think of. So that is how we actually address these 2 issues. And coming to the point, why do we need this? So when it comes to financials, people are really picky on the security thing. They need complete control over their assets because many trading platforms are custodial. That means that they hold your assets and you do not have complete say in what to do with those assets, which is kind of tricky. But as a roll up, you can definitely uh, mitigate that in a sense that it is held by the smart contract, the roll up smart contract that you are deploying, and the security is maintained by your own smart contract that you're deploying on the EVM chain. And also, as you mentioned, the adoption is very slow because the big corporates and large institutions are the last movers. They never go for experimental technology or new technologies just from the fact that the amount of value that is at stake is huge. So you cannot just jump into any experimental technology. It has to be time tested and it has to be compatible with their existing systems and processes. So I think Cartesi has a pivotal role to play in this particular sense because most big institutions have a Web 2 tech stack, and shifting completely to a Web 3 tech stack is kind of difficult. But Cartesi actually wants to act as that bridge where you can transfer your Web 2 tech stack and still make it Web 3 compatible. For example, if you have any kind of machine learning model or any Web 2 tech stack that is already completely tested, fully bug free, and running in production, you can build it on Cartesi machine and make it Web 3 compatible. So I think Cartesi has a role to play for institutional adoption. It will come, but it will come with the blockchain security guarantees and ease of transitioning between Web 2 and Web 3.
So, you know, the Web 2 world and their regulars are far behind Web 3. How do we catch them up, get them up to speed, so that they can not participate but be comfortable with how this all works?
Well, in every revolution that you see, there is always fear. And I think at the end of the day, the regulators trying to save And their goal, right, is to make sure that the millions that investing and believing in Web3 are not going to get into rug pulls or people will mishandle the thing. So I think obviously they have good intentions. But whatever every technological revolution is bringing, it's a lot of concerns, fears, and in the pace that technology is evolving today, we need to address that from the get-go. Work with the regulator in order to see how we come to a place that there is a balance, right? How we come to a place that there is enough reporting, but it doesn't stop the innovation, right? And the novelties. And yeah, I think what you see today with the SEC and different fights you have through different ecosystem. Like as a newcomer in the last 3 years, it's going to be super interesting how everything evolve. You see the ETF right now, the Bitcoin ETF at the beginning of the year, and suddenly the Ethereum ETF just also coming up. I think the regulator has a lot on their stake to deal with, and obviously I'm not envying them. Our goal from the beginning in Lava was to see what are the needs and to support the adoption. If somebody wants to build an app, build a dApp, why he needs to start building his own cloud infrastructure, right? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't, not a single dApp has the resources to start spinning up their own nodes. So our core mission here, and I think that's what you mentioned before, is to allow anyone to build whatever, wherever. Doesn't matter which chain, doesn't matter what. But with Lava, you have a facilitated infrastructure that allows you to build it.
I like it. I want to talk about those developers because I can tell you what I've seen in the past several years is every new chain or every new project trying to reinvent the wheel instead of leveraging what exists. You're leveraging what exists, right? And one of the biggest, arguments I've seen is this whole entire concept of modular versus monolithic, right? Why is the focus now on modular networks?
It depends who you're asking, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all definition. And what I learned personally in Web3 is that this is a narrative world, right? If you hit the right narrative, it can go viral, and then everyone going to speak about that. Whereas it doesn't mean it's really different from the narrative that was 1 year ago. It's just a different label that suddenly was adopted. So you see not only monolithic, modular, you see chain abstraction, led by Ilya from Near, is also a strong, influencer in the AI world. And you see that there are different narratives. At the end of the day, I think that's it's very unique for the Lava network. It doesn't matter which doctrine you choose. It doesn't matter what you believe in. You need to read right transactions. Okay, you need to read right the data, and you cannot build your own infrastructure at home. So you need to utilize the existing infrastructure, and that's how, in general, we want to simplify this thing. You've seen a new chain up and coming, right? And you want to build this next crazy dApp on top of that. We want to shorten the process of you executing that, delivering this service, and refraining from you to need to run your own infrastructure. At the end of the day, when you see the dApps rushing to a specific ecosystem, they use the public infrastructure of each chain. Who's maintaining that today? It's the chain himself. But also the chain has a lot of things to do. So that's how in the last half a year, actually even more, 1 year ago, chains started to reach out to us and said, but what you doing actually with Lava? It's a public good, right? You are just picking up the fastest node runner that closest to the location of the dApp, and you get a fast response for them. and you make those node runners accountable. So at the end of the day, you are public good because you're not biased towards one specific providers, right?
I want to talk about your ID then. Your ID should allow, in theory, the ability for everybody to be able on the same page when it comes to decentralization, right? Without you having to do this KYC process because you have the identity, right? So why should we all be on the decentralized platforms? And how can your ID help really, get us to one of the promises of blockchain, which is identity for the unidentified?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The way we have set up the platform now is KYC is only necessary when the user wants to on or off ramp funds, right? And Reveel is a fully non-custodial platform, and we like it that way. We think that's the right approach. The beauty of the technology is that it can really reach a very broad audience. Now, the issue around identity, and KYC, banking the unbanked, or identifying the unidentifiable, as you put it. I think a lot of that does depend on the regulatory landscape you're operating in, and that's a much slower change, right? So I think there's a lot of lobbying that needs to happen from the crypto community, a lot of educating of regulators in all the jurisdictions, so that we can eventually start using the technology for that. But that is going to take time.
I think so too. I think it'll take time for the regulators to come on board. So
yeah,
I'm looking for.
We're seeing some good progress, right? Like it's slow and it's frustrating that it's that slow. A lot of us who are in the space are, we're builders, we're innovators, we're early adopters, and so we want things to move a lot faster. The reality of these regulators is they usually take a very steady and slow approach, which one could argue has its advantages, I mean, for their role. But it's gonna take time, and it's gonna remain frustrating for a while, I think, for a lot of us. But I'm confident that in the long term, it will go in the right direction. I think Mika in Europe is a step in that direction. Hopefully in the US we get some type of stable coin regulation in place sooner rather than later. And go from there.
Yeah, I hope so. So one thing that we talked about a little bit briefly before the call was, Bitcoin and Ethereum, and there's still a pain point out there for people who traders, especially who want to trade Ethereum for Bitcoin. There's really no easy way to do it without going through a centralized intermediary like a Coinbase or something, or Kraken or some kind of exchange, right? What are the pain points? Why do they still exist? And why hasn't somebody done something yet about it?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is it's challenging from a technology perspective, right? We're talking about cryptos on different chains, different environments, and creating applications that can really handle those types of multi-chain transactions are it's a challenge. It's a technology challenge, right? And so that just takes time. I think we're seeing some pretty good progress around sort of multi-chain accounts, just chain abstraction in general. I think is going to be a big trend in the coming probably months, and sort of the next wave of wallet related products. So I'm quite bullish on just chain abstraction in general. My perspective has always been that blockchain is a back-end technology, right? And it doesn't necessarily need to be in the front end. Like, we have to look at what is the intent of users. And usually their intent is not related to what technology they're using, right? They're just trying to accomplish something. And so how do we facilitate that intent with the best tech, and with tech that respects sort of the values that you want, right? Whether that is self-custody, different degrees of decentralization, security, etc.
Interesting. So you initially came from, or one of the places you live in the world was Africa, right? And with the advancement of AI, and I look at where my podcast, the countries where my podcast isn't listened to, it's the countries where they don't have access to electricity, still, right? So how do you overcome, in order to advance AI, you would have to be able to offer or help advance electricity or access to electricity. So how do you help do that in this world that's still not, there isn't a lot of, I know you're going to Davos next week. It's going to be a topic there, right? How do you enable the access to the things people don't have yet that other people take for granted?
This is a really, really good question, and I have some of my own opinions that are actually quite strong on this. But I think so we actually worked with the United Nations quite closely and put together one of the flagship reports on how blockchain and crypto could help achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals and help alleviate poverty. And one of the big things that really pulls back society is the ability to access credit, right? And we're not talking about large amounts of credit. So if you're in the Western world, you might be able to borrow $500,000 or $1 million to buy a home, or $2 million, depending on different levels of collateral, et cetera, right? But if you're in, parts of, the developing world, you might not be able to access $200 to start a little store. And even if you have a good ability to pay it back, if you've never missed, say, like a phone payment or all sorts of other things that there's already history on, right? So we're not talking about there being zero history. And this is actually quite frustrating and sad. And so, for example, we've got companies like Credit in our portfolio, so KREDETE, that's really changing the world on this. And they've got already hundreds and hundreds of thousands of customers that they've issued and helped issue loans to. And these are microloans, very high payback rates. And they're actually working with banks and microfinance banks to help turn their portfolios more effectively into being able to issue microfinance loans effectively. And this has actually been working really, really well. And they've got, stable coin rails sort of in the background that helps you even move money cross-border, helps move money home to different countries, et cetera. And this is actually working very, very well. One of the things that I think crypto does better than anything out there is crypto really allows for the ability for anyone to have a bank account, right? If you think about a wallet, and anyone to have borrowing, lending, and savings products, which are the core sort of banking products, right? And one of the big challenges, and I'm not saying there's no reason for this, but one of the big challenges historically, I think, has been anti-money laundering rules. And AML rules are there for a reason. Of course, you don't want the, terrorist financing, and you don't want the drug financing and all of that. But you can't also be okay with cutting out 1 billion people out of a system and say that, yeah, this is probably all in the same bucket. Like, it's really not. And, this is a big problem, I think, that exists where a lot of the Western world has sort of decided that, these categories of people all fall into that. So one of the important things to know from a banking perspective is Western banks don't typically work with the banks in some of these developing countries because of, these anti-money laundering rules. So if the bank, say like JP Morgan Chase is working with a bank in Zambia, right? If JP Morgan Chase sends money to this bank in Zambia for a customer, JP Morgan Chase needs to know what that customer then does with it, or what happens with that money at that bank to the next customer. And if they can't trust the information from that bank in Zambia, they would rather cut that bank off entirely. So now they no longer work with that bank in Zambia. This is actually the big problem. And this is what actually cuts off banking access from a lot of the world, and then cuts off credit and all sorts of other things. And, you know, I'm a big proponent of how decentralization actually just leapfrogs the entire banking system on this and can actually create a completely alternative system that doesn't violate these anti-money laundering rules from the perspective of the intent, right, which is stopping drug financing and terrorist financing. You can actually get, you know, and just go help people start businesses and start building their lives and getting credit and, you know, feeding their families and having their kids go have a good education. And these are the things that really matter, I think, at the end of the day. And I really think that this technology has the potential to leapfrog that, and is already starting to.